He told everyone I was crazy, until the day I walked right past him, smiling, silent, and made him unravel without saying a single word. They say when a relationship ends, there's always one person who walks away quieter. That was me, but don't mistake silence for surrender. Some storms you walk through without saying a word, because you're saving your voice for the aftermath. It was a Thursday evening in late October. Cold air had settled over the city like a warning, the kind of night where everything feels brittle and sharp. My ex, Eli, had called me upstairs in that tone, the one he used when he needed a new villain in his story. "I know you've been talking to Jenna behind my back," he accused, standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed like a high school principal. There wasn't a trace of warmth left in his voice, just ice and gasoline. Jenna was his sister. She'd sent me a message earlier that week. "You okay? I don't like the way he talks to you, just know I see it." I hadn't responded, but somehow even silence threatened his control. I didn't defend myself. I just watched him unravel. How fast he moved from suspicion to outrage, from outrage to performance. That's when I realized something. Eli didn't want peace. He wanted spectacle. He needed an audience, and I'd been clapping for years without knowing it. He raised his voice. He threw out words like disloyal, sneaky, manipulative. Said I was playing the victim, classic projection. I just stood there, arms at my sides, a strange stillness growing in my chest. For the first time, I didn't try to explain, didn't try to hold it all together. That silence unnerved him more than any screaming match ever could. He slammed a cabinet door. He paced. He waited for me to snap. Instead, I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and left without a single tear or word. The front door clicked shut behind me, soft as a sigh. No slam, no drama, just the end. It wasn't until I was sitting in my car, hands trembling around the steering wheel, that I realized something profound. I hadn't lost anything that night. I'd been freed. My name is Mara. I was 32 when I walked out of that house, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. You don't really understand how far you've been pulled under until you break the surface again. The weight I'd been carrying wasn't just about Eli's control or his temper. It was the slow erosion of self that happens when you start believing you deserve the silence, the suspicion, the second guessing. He'd built a version of me in his head, a woman who owed him access to every thought, every friend, every breath. And the moment I stopped handing those over like receipts, he turned the whole house into a courtroom. But I wasn't interested in fighting anymore. Not in that way. I didn't want the kind of revenge that burned things to the ground. I wanted something quieter, more dangerous. I didn't want him to see me break. I wanted him to see me become unrecognizable. I stayed with my cousin for the first few days. Her guest room smelled like lavender and dryer sheets, and every night I fell asleep to the soft hum of her dishwasher. Something so ordinary, so peaceful, it almost made me cry. But I didn't cry, not yet. I think my body had gone into emotional lockdown. It wasn't numbness, it was strategy. Grief is a storm, but this was a controlled burn. I was regulating the damage. Eli didn't stop calling for the first 48 hours. First, it was angry voicemails, then apology texts. By the third day, he'd switched tones again, desperate, manipulative, asking me to talk like adults. I never answered. Every vibration of my phone felt like a dare. Come back, just once, break your silence. But I knew if I gave him even a crack of space, he'd wedge himself back into my mind. Eli wasn't looking for reconciliation. He was looking for control disguised as remorse. Instead, I sat on that lavender-scented bed, opened a notebook, and wrote down one sentence. He doesn't get to narrate my story anymore. I stopped explaining myself to anyone, mutual friends, family members, people who asked, "Are you sure it's over?" As if the absence of bruises meant the absence of damage. I was done explaining. I was done managing other people's discomfort with my truth. And in that silence, something unexpected started to grow: clarity. I looked back at the hundreds of small indignities I'd tolerated. The guilt trips when I wanted time with friends, the cold shoulder when I succeeded at work, the way he always turned any concern I raised into an accusation against me. It was psychological warfare, disguised as love. He never hit me, but he dismantled me, one subtle dismissal at a time. And I'd thanked him for it. That's what scared me the most, how grateful I'd been for breadcrumbs. How deeply I'd believed I had to earn peace. That's the real horror of emotional abuse. It teaches you to doubt the worth of your own reality. So I chose stillness, not weakness, stillness. I stopped checking his socials. I stopped hoping he'd get it. I stopped imagining dramatic confrontations in the grocery store. Instead, I began rebuilding in secret. I signed up for a gym I knew he'd never set foot in. I reconnected with friends I'd quietly distanced myself from to make our relationship easier. I went back to therapy, and I started showing up to my job, not just physically, but fully, present, capable, unapologetically sharp. Silence gave me room to listen, to myself, and the more I listened, the more I realized that revenge didn't need to look like retaliation. It could look like peace. It could look like never flinching again. It could look like becoming someone he would no longer recognize, and someone I finally could. There's a specific kind of silence that unnerves manipulators. It's not the silence of weakness or confusion. It's the silence of calculation. I didn't make a grand announcement about leaving Eli. I didn't post cryptic quotes or passive-aggressive selfies. I vanished, quietly, elegantly. And in doing so, I became a question he couldn't answer. Where did I go? Who was I becoming? That's the thing about men like Eli. They count on you needing their attention. When you no longer perform pain for them, they panic. A month after I left, I heard from a mutual friend that he'd been asking around. "Have you seen Mara? She doing okay? Is she seeing anyone?" It was all said with concern on the surface, but I knew the tone. I'd heard it before. He wasn't worried, he was wounded. Not by my absence, but by the absence of drama. He had expected a mess. Instead, I gave him nothing. And nothing is terrifying to someone who feeds off chaos. Meanwhile, I was busy. I poured myself into my work and earned a promotion I didn't even know was on the table. I led a successful pitch that landed our firm a major contract. I started mentoring a younger colleague, someone I saw pieces of myself in, smart, quiet, a little afraid to take up space. Outside of work, I joined a local hiking group. I started taking early morning walks just to feel the cold air on my skin. I rediscovered how good my body could feel when I moved for me. Not for punishment, not to look good for someone else, but simply because I wanted to. And every once in a while, I'd hear from someone who still had one foot in Eli's world. "He said you ghosted him," one person told me. "He's worried about you," another said. That's when I started to understand the real game. Eli didn't miss me. He missed the narrative control, so I kept doing the one thing he couldn't stand, thriving in silence. I didn't block him. That would have confirmed that he still had influence. I just muted him. Let him watch me from the shadows if he wanted. He began to feel my absence not as a clean break, but as a quiet threat, an unfinished sentence he couldn't rewrite. 3 months in, I posted a photo, just one. It was nothing dramatic, just me, smiling softly in the golden light of a late afternoon, holding a coffee in one hand and a sketchbook in the other. No caption, no location, just presence. Within an hour, I saw that familiar view count go up. Eli had looked, he was watching. That moment wasn't petty, it was precise, because I knew that silence paired with confidence is the one thing he couldn't distort. He used to say, "You think you're better than me?" And now, without ever saying it, I was proving it. But my revenge wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about becoming undeniable to myself. It's strange how the world starts to bend back toward you when you stop chasing people who push you away. 6 months after I left Eli, I ran into one of his old coworkers at a networking event. Her name was Sienna, smart, sharp, quiet observer type. We'd only met a few times before, but this time she walked right up to me like we were old friends. "I heard about you and Eli," she said, not unkindly. "I just want to say, I always wondered how you stayed so calm with him. He had a way of turning everything into a war." I smiled politely, but inside her words hit like a well-placed arrow. She'd seen it. Others had too. I hadn't imagined it. She leaned in closer, conspiratorial. "He's been in rare form lately, lost a client, snapped at his manager. Seems like he's unraveling a bit." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. I wasn't just gone. I was thriving, and he was spinning. That was the part Eli never saw coming. He'd built our relationship on the assumption that I needed him more than he needed me. When that illusion collapsed, so did his composure. Meanwhile, my life had become something else entirely. My apartment was small but warm. My fridge was full of things I liked. My nights were quiet in a way that felt sacred, not lonely. And slowly, the people around me began to shift too. Mutual friends who had stayed neutral started reaching out, asking to catch up. At first, I was wary, but I realized something. People were starting to see him clearly now that I was out of the way. Turns out I'd been his camouflage. Without me to soften his edges or clean up his messes, he was just exposed. And the most satisfying part? I didn't have to say a word. I became the version of myself he always feared, unbothered, unreachable, and radiant without his approval. I was attending gallery openings, helping organize fundraisers, exploring new hobbies like painting and ceramics. I was pouring all the energy I used to spend on managing his moods into building something solid inside myself. And I made sure he could see it, subtly, strategically. At one point, he emailed me a long, rambling message about misunderstandings, how he never meant to hurt me, and maybe we could get coffee just to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I archived it without replying. No rage, no closure speech, just absence. Because by then I understood my silence wasn't just a response, it was the punishment. He could live in his noise. I'd found peace in the quiet, and that, to him, was louder than any scream I could have thrown at him in the kitchen that night. It was nearly a year to the day since I'd left him when we finally crossed paths. I hadn't planned it. I was just grabbing coffee near the river walk, my usual Sunday ritual. It was a cool spring morning, sky overcast, breeze sharp but not unfriendly. I'd just tucked a fresh croissant into my tote when I heard it. "Mara!" I turned slowly. There he was, Eli. He looked tired, not older, just dimmer, like someone had turned down the contrast on his entire being. His hair was longer, messier, his coat looked expensive, but it didn't sit right on him. Everything about him seemed unsettled. I kept my face neutral. I didn't smile, didn't frown, just present. He stepped closer, too casual. "Wow, you look different." "I am," I said. That threw him off, just slightly. He adjusted his posture, gave me the old half-smirk. "Didn't think I'd run into you here." "I come here a lot," I replied simply. A beat of silence. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "Listen, I've been meaning to reach out. I didn't expect things to, end like that." I tilted my head. "How did you expect them to end?" He blinked, hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I thought we'd at least have a real conversation." "You had plenty of those," I said softly. "They just weren't with me. They were about me." The smirk disappeared. "I was going through a lot," he said, almost rehearsed. "We all were," I replied. "You chose to turn your pain into a performance. I chose to survive." He looked away for a moment, jaw tightening. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "But you did," I said. "And when I stopped letting you, that's when you noticed." Another silence, this one heavier. I took a slow breath, then looked him dead in the eyes. "You wanted me to break. I didn't. That's the difference." His expression cracked, just for a second. And that second was enough. I stepped past him, calm and unhurried. But just before I reached the street, I turned back once, gently, like I was remembering something faintly nostalgic. "You were right about one thing, though," I said. He looked up. "I do look different. Turns out dignity fits better than fear." And then I walked away. No glance back, no second thought. Just the slow, certain echo of silence following me down the sidewalk. My apartment is small, modest by most standards, but every piece in it is mine. The books on the shelves, the prints on the wall, even the chipped mug I drink coffee from every morning. Each one chosen by me, for me. There's a quiet rebellion in that. After years of being edited, trimmed down, and second-guessed, every detail in my space now speaks my name. Sometimes, late at night, I light a candle and sit by the window. I watch the city breathe. Cars passing, people laughing faintly in the distance, life rolling forward. It's in those moments I realize how far I've come from the version of me who used to walk on eggshells. I used to rehearse conversations in my head before speaking to Eli. I'd weigh my words carefully, worried about tone, about triggers, about whether the truth was too sharp for his ego. Now I speak without rehearsal. I write without flinching. I take up space in every room I enter, not loudly, but fully, and the people around me feel it, even those who used to doubt me. My mother called one night, months after I left him. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "I didn't see it," she said quietly. "I should have, but I didn't." I didn't respond right away. "You never yelled," she added, almost to herself. "You just got smaller." That's what emotional erosion does. It doesn't scream, it whispers. Until you're unsure where you end and their needs begin. But I've redrawn my edges now, with ink and steel. The change hasn't gone unnoticed. I heard from an old coworker recently, someone who had met Eli once at a holiday party. She messaged me out of nowhere. I ran into him at a conference. He seems different, she wrote. Angry different or empty different? I asked. Both, she replied. I didn't gloat, but I didn't feel guilty either, because while he was pacing circles in his head, I had climbed mountains, literal and emotional. I took a solo trip last fall, drove north deep into the Adirondacks, stayed in a cabin with no reception, no noise, just trees, wind, and silence. The good kind. I hiked every morning, legs burning, lungs pushing back, against the thin air. One day I reached a ridge that overlooked a sweeping valley, dressed in gold and rust-red leaves. I sat down on a rock and cried, not because I was sad, but because I felt whole. He never knew that version of me, and now he never will. There was a man I met on that trip, quiet, kind eyes. He helped me pick a trail after a storm knocked down part of the route. We talked by the fire later that evening, nothing flirtatious, just two people who had both walked away from something heavy. He told me he'd spent 5 years in a relationship that slowly bled him dry. I nodded and said, I know the sound of that silence. We didn't exchange numbers, we didn't promise anything, but we shared a look, a kind of mutual understanding. Like veterans of a war no one saw. That's what healing looks like. Not a grand romance, not a clean slate, but a quiet recognition of your own strength in someone else's eyes. I still get updates about Eli now and then, always secondhand, always unsolicited. He's still in the city, still working at the same firm, still loud in all the ways that matter least. But I don't react anymore. He's just a paragraph I've outgrown. Last week, I returned to the Riverwalk where I'd run into Eli all those months ago. Not because of him, because it's mine now. The air was brisk, leaves swirling gently across the path. I held a coffee in my hand, wore the same long coat I'd worn that day. But this time I wasn't looking back over my shoulder. I sat on the same bench where I'd once watched him walk away. I crossed my legs, pulled out my journal, and wrote 3 words. Still rising always. A child ran past me, chasing a red balloon. A couple laughed nearby. Somewhere, a saxophone played softly in the distance. And in that moment, I realized something. The loudest revenge isn't destruction, it's resurrection. It's becoming someone you're proud to be when no one's watching, no stage, no spotlight, no performance. Just peace, earned, reclaimed, and worn like armor. I sipped my coffee slowly. The wind shifted, and I smiled, softly, without reason, because I had become untouchable. If you've ever walked away quietly from someone who tried to break you, this story was for you. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. Silence isn't weakness, it's power. Subscribe for more slow burn stories of quiet revenge and graceful reinvention.